changed. Telstra's threats have finally caught up, and these threats are here to stay. Hi, we represent the University of Sydney. So Telstra is Australia's oldest telco provider, and this is its supply chain. Besides device hardware, Telstra makes its money in the remaining 5 segments, 2 of which are under significant external pressure. First, Telstra is no longer the undisputed leader in retail mobile and broadband plans. With competitors flooding the market, what historically was Telstra's revenue value-driving segment, contributing 57% of EBITDA, has seen the impacts of changing times. Its customers are leaving for better value, and Telstra's subscriber growth levels and average revenue per user levels, ARPU, have evaporated. Secondly, Telstra has seen the impacts of change in the last mile network. So traditionally, Telstra owned almost all of the last mile networks, the infrastructure connecting you and me to the internet. However, in 2009, the Australian government introduced the National Broadband Network, NBN. In doing so, the real kicker is this. The Australian government has effectively taken away Telstra's monopolistic wholesale advantage, handed that to the NBN Co, with the NBN Co now charging Telstra back for access to the last mile network. Times have changed for Telstra, who transitions from being a wholesaler to a retailer, with broadband margins slashed by half. As Telstra suffers quality outages, as customers migrate onto the NBN, and as Telstra slashes its dividends, we've seen its share price fall by 35%. But we believe that prices will fall even further, and hence we issue a sell recommendation with a 12-month target price of $2.67, marking a 17% downside on last close. We believe the market is expecting 3 things. The worst of NBN has already been felt, industry consolidation will quell mobile competition, and Telstra will capitalise on 5G as first mover. Respectfully, we disagree. We believe that NBN margins will be squeezed further, mobile customers will migrate, and 5G competitors will enter simultaneously, and hence Telstra's not going to get that 8% ARPU premium jump, which it expects. On to you, Ken.
A significant industry shift is the ongoing rollout of the National Broadband Network. Now, historically, Telstra enjoyed high margins as a monopoly wholesaler of traditional broadband. However, the Australian government decided to standardise access to broadband for Australian homes and businesses, and in doing so established the entity NBN Co. This entity now owns the tangible network assets that Telstra once commanded and charges retail service providers. Since this transition began, Telstra's broadband margins have collapsed to just 16%. Now on to our first investment thesis point. Whilst we believe that a lot of the impact of NBN disruption has already been felt, we think that broadband margins have further room to fall. NBN Co has a $100 million free cash flow target. It wishes to achieve this by setting a quantity and a price goal. On the quantity side, it's expecting the take-up rate or percentage of switching users to increase to 73%. And on the price side, it's expecting to increase its cost to Telstra to $52 per user. However, it faces a dilemma. Network congestion is up by 455%. Our analysis of historical trends reveals that when congestion or network downtime is high, take-up rates are low. And based on this relationship, we forecast a more modest take-up rate of 69%. So given the quantity side of the equation is not holding, in order for the equation to hold overall, the price or cost to Telstra must increase by $56 per user. This cost directly impacts Telstra's margins, causing them to collapse to just 8%. And we haven't even touched on mobile.
Telstra has been Australia's dominant mobile network provider, but the competitive environment has intensified. Rivals Optus and Vodafone now offer more data at cheaper levels. Telstra's mobile market share has fallen 10% since 2014. Customers are increasingly choosing based on price, which has also forced Telstra's ARPU to continue falling towards $54. We forecast that Telstra's customers will continue to churn to competitors. This is because competitors are going to rivals that have better quality offerings. We note that in the past, Telstra had by far the highest quality mobile network. But today, Telstra only has 10% more towers, 4% better web connection, 5% faster downloads, and core success rates are the same. And with network speeds, Telstra is actually slower. So what happens with that is that since Telstra still prices its plans up to 42% over rivals, we incorporated those 5 factors into our quality price model. We calculated that the fair value of Telstra's quality advantage has now slipped $5 below the value of the premium that Telstra's customers are paying for it. That's bad news for Telstra because in Australia we're reaching a high churn event. More households switching to the national broadband network mean that more customers are also beginning to consider switching their mobile plans. Less and less people on fixed contracts means that customers are more susceptible to churn now. And the outlook gets worse for Telstra when we look at how customers view their brand. NPS measures how likely someone will refer their friends and family to use Telstra. But Telstra's NPS has fallen 13.5 points below their rivals. This is because there's been 174 outages on the Telstra network since January of 2018. And second, their customer service wait times are excessive. Our team, for instance, it took us 1.5 hours just to reach a real human on Telstra's hotline, and that aligns with industry surveys as well. In a high churn environment with lots of competition and Telstra's quality advantage continuously slipping, we calculated that Telstra's mobile market share is likely to continue falling towards 34%, and there are still problems with 5G.
Thanks, Brendan. Telstra has one more card up its sleeve, 5G. And 5G improves on 4G in two main ways. Increased speed means you can now download that Avengers movie in 3.6 seconds. Reduced latency means that lag on Skype calls is now completely gone. But to understand 5G's valuation impact, let's first look into the past. Telstra historically capitalised on high ARPU growth as first to market. But looking under the bonnet, we see that competitors only came in a lot later, allowing Telstra to upgrade its existing network and cement its position as a monopoly. When 4G lifted ARPU, share prices climbed 28%, with 4GX 18%. It's not difficult to see why investors and management are betting on 5G to repeat history. But our catalyst is that 5G's ARPU will disappoint as the race to launch it intensifies. This is because this time around, all competitors are ready to go. When Telstra upgraded its network and spectrum, so did its competitors. When Telstra began trial of 5G in July, Optus began in August and Vodafone began in January. When Telstra launched the first stages of 5G in 2019, Optus was already there. And 5G compatible devices only become mainstream in 2020, essentially giving Telstra's competitors an entire year of headroom. So now that we've looked at price, how about quantity? We expect a compression of Telstra's customer base, both high and low value. Telstra's high value customers are currently entitled to stream a handful of sports, or they could watch it for free on TV, or even in their hotel rooms. Customers that want to watch Australia's most participated sport, soccer, must be with Optus. And second, bundling TPG's low-cost broadband and Vodafone's low-cost mobile means they can now directly compete for Telstra's bundled customers. So we have depressed ARPUs and compressed customers. How does that look like for valuation?
Thanks, Bill. My colleagues have spoken to the various headwinds facing Telstra. Increased competition, increased subscriber churn and declining ARPUs have led to forecast revenue growth over the forecast period of negative 1.5%. Telstra's high degree of operating leverage, coupled with the limited incremental margin opportunity, saw our free cash flow schedule plateau and a compression on EBITDA margins from 40% to 25%. What we're seeing here, ladies and gentlemen, is a company that's historically been able to return 12% on capital, transition to a company that now returns 6% on capital. With this changing return profile, coupled with an increase in cost of capital, our intrinsic valuation yielded a value of $2.72. Relatively speaking, we got two different peer universes for both CoreCo and InfraCo. Given the nature of InfraCo, we believe it to trade more along the lines of infrastructure telecommunication companies such as Zayo and Netlink. Amongst other multiples, EV to EBIT was used and weighted at 50% as it better encapsulates the telecommunications industry and the capital intensity associated with it. By weighting our intrinsic valuation at 80% and our relative valuation at 20%, a blended valuation of $2.67 was calculated, or a 17% downside to last close. We do, however, acknowledge various risks to this thesis. Should industry consolidation lead to further price stability, we anticipate ARPU upside with a valuation effect of 35 cents. Similar risks include if Telstra is able to dominate the 5G rollout and successfully pivot to the provision of enterprise solutions. In the unlikely event that these risks materialise together, we'd see our sell recommendation shift to a hold.
So with NBN margins continuing to be squeezed, customers migrating to better value providers, and with 5G competitors entering simultaneously, customers are ready to hang up on Telstra. And so are we. Thank you for your time. We will now take your questions.
So you looked at the NBN margin squeeze as a key risk factor. Have you thought about potentially Telstra using the 5G network to bypass the NBN, and what might that mean for the company and the share price?
If we so currently historically, if we look at that, with 4G, that was already matching speeds of the current broadband, but so far we haven't seen that happen. People aren't switching to 4G as a replacement for the current broadband, and that's because of two reasons. Firstly, the reason is because it's an issue in terms of capacity. So with broadband, there's no theoretical limit. You can have as many people on that network as possible. It's just about how much CVC the telco companies buy. But with the issue with 5G and the issue with wireless connection is that for every other person on the network, that speed then has to be divided. So there's a capacity constraint first to that, and that's why you've got data for fixed increasing to around 500 gigabytes per quarter, whereas data for wireless has stayed around that 25. And secondly, historically, it's only been a business case for regional areas where fixed broadband and NBN might not be able to reach, and that's where fixed wireless works best. And fixed wireless is currently being implemented by NBN already.
So it is, or is it an opportunity for Telstra as we move to 5G?
It's a small opportunity, but for it to completely replace, not likely. CEO Andy Penn has said it would replace around 15%. We don't think that's too likely because of these capacity constraints on the network.
Good comparison. I like the page on page 4 comparison about the market expectation. So how did you kind of get firm up or get conviction in this market view?
So what we looked at were some of the key trends that were driving the most important value segments of this business. We noted that firstly, the retail segment was the most important one, driving 57% of EBITDA generation for this company. And we also noted that the three biggest trends facing this industry in the retail segment for retail customers was the ongoing rollout of the NBN, increasing consolidation in the mobile space, as well as upcoming expectations around 5G. So from those expectations, we looked at some of the key forecasts that both Telstra as well as key stakeholders like NBN Co, the government-owned entity, were pegging their bets on. So that's why we have high conviction that the NBN wholesale charges that the CEO of Telstra, that Telstra company, are relying on for the forecast period are things that haven't been considered when we look at the take-up rate discrepancy and what that impact would be on those margins. And similarly, we took the same approach to our 5G as well as our mobile consolidation thesis.
Sorry, my question was more like what's priced in the stock price?
So we think that current consolidation trends are partially priced in. We know that across major developed markets, for instance, like the United States, like the United Kingdom, there has been activities of consolidation. So when we look at, for instance, consolidation with TPG in the past and acquiring pipe networks, and future consolidation with companies like Vodafone, that might be partially priced in. However, we don't think the market is properly pricing in the impact of that consolidation onto the three-player mobile market competitive landscape. We don't think it's doing that because they're looking at current depressed levels of ARPU, for instance, and thinking that any form of consolidation will start easing that pressure. However, our analysis suggests that it will just heighten the capacity and competitive strength of those players.
Is there anything the company can do to improve its ARPU?
Thank you very much for your question. So one of the key things that is happening overseas is we are seeing first movers into 5G. So in the US, you've got AT&T as a clear leader. In UK, Vodafone is the first to trial. But the issue in Australia is that they think that Telstra will be the first to market, and they think that's going to lift ARPU. If Telstra does become first to market, based on a lot of other issues, maybe if networks stop working for Optus or if networks stop working for TPG Vodafone, that would allow them to then have that historical 8% ARPU, which they might expect. But at this stage, especially with Optus already starting 5G and starting it as fixed wireless, we don't think it is likely.
Yeah, I would like to look at the chart on page 13. And on the right, that you mentioned the Tesla capitalized on high ARPU growth as a first to market. And on that chart, actually it shows that Tesla successfully captured all the 3G, 4G first mover advantage. And you argue that the 5G, they cannot be captured. But when I look at that chart, even the 4GX, actually they capture it. And then the ARPU rebound to, I don't know, around 5.5% from the chart. And do you have the idea on when they lose the advantage on 4GX?
So that question you were asking, with a decrease in ARPU afterwards, whether that would still be beneficial in a couple of years?
Yeah, roughly like that. But actually, every time they get the first mover advantage, they enjoy it for only about a year.
Yeah.
So that year actually gives them a very good push on the share price already.
Yeah.
So on 4GX, actually they still got 5.5% ARPU on your very right side of the chart. And first question is when, the competitors catch up. And the second question is why do you think 5G can't be the case if they can be the first mover advantage, even though the competitors are moving very quickly?
Okay. I'll answer that first question first. So with respect to when competitors catch up, it's usually a year later, and they do also enjoy ARPU uplift. The reason why we see such a sudden decline is because currently, in terms of the international landscape, we're seeing 33% decline in ARPU in the last 10 years in global averages. So what the market expects is a decline in ARPU. And how this, with 5G, even though it's increased in the first year and it sees a little bit of a drop later, it still hits that market, it still is a flat line in terms of growth, which is beneficial for shareholders from their perspective. And then, could you repeat the second question as well, please?
Basically, yes, when I look at this chart, I saw that when Tesla moved to 3G, 4G, or even 4GX, they can capture a year of ARPU growth.
Yes.
And that actually reflects in the share price as well.
Yes.
So your argument is they can be still the first one in 5G, but they can't be captured, that advantage cannot be captured from the share price.
Yes.
So my question is why?
Okay, it's because historically they were the first to market, and that means they were the only ones on the market when people jumped onto 5G, and they could capture all that ARPU uplift by themselves. But when another competitor such as Optus comes along, then they have to share that ARPU uplift with Optus, because Optus would then be competing with competitive prices as well. And how we measured that was we took the ARPU uplift as the first mover to market, and then the ARPU uplift as a second mover to market. We combined that together and took the average of that in order to get a base ARPU uplift for 2020 when 5G is expected. And then we also include the TPG Vodafone effect of them entering into 5G at a similar time as well, in order to calculate our 3%.
You mentioned that they're facing a lot of competition in the mobile market as well. So I believe mobile voice and hardware also are large revenue generators for the company. How are they performing against competitors on ARPU and subscriber growth with regard to mobile voice?
So I'll answer that first question in terms of ARPU, and then Wendy will answer the question about subscribers. So in terms of ARPU, we're looking at a company that has been declining ARPU. In fact, in the last 18 months, they declined their mobile ARPU by $6. But what is really important is that this has been lagged following the ARPU drops of their competitors as they look to acquire customers. So that $6 drop followed soon after Optus announced $8 in drops cumulatively over the same 18-month period.
Okay, so I will talk to you about subscriber growth. If we could pull up slide 69, you see that Telstra's competitors in mobile, so say Vodafone and Optus, they're both spending a lot of money trying to improve the quality of their services, $1 billion and $1.3 billion respectively. The impact this then has on subscriber growth is that Telstra's customers are looking forward to leaving for potentially better value offerings. In FY19, in the first quarter, you saw Telstra add two.
With a sell on Telstra, that was University of Sydney. The judges will now